This is Scott Stevens, the most ruthless hitter in NHL history.
Can make things happen in a hurry.
Known for taking the heads off superstars, he became the poster boy for what is remembered as the dead puck era.
From the New York Devils, number 4, Scott Stevens.
Stevens was such a devastating hitter that it overshadowed just how great he was at controlling the game. Some fans claim that Scott Stevens ruined hockey. For over a decade, Stevens was one of the most feared and respected players in the NHL, setting a new standard for elite defense. Portrayed as a villain, we could make a strong argument that Scott Stevens is the most underrated superstar in modern NHL history. In 1982, Scott Stevens was drafted 5th overall by the Washington Capitals and immediately made the NHL out of camp. During his time with the Capitals, Stevens became the star of the team, starving for an identity. In 8 seasons of existence before they had Scott Stevens, the Capitals never made the playoffs and failed to win 30 games in any season. But once Stevens joined the team, that changed. With Stevens on the roster, the Capitals made the playoffs for 8 seasons straight. They became one of the hardest teams to score against, and Stevens put up some impressive offensive numbers to push his team into contention. In his 3rd year in the league, Stevens scored 21 goals from the blue line, and in 1988, Stevens set a new career high with 72 points. He put up these offensive numbers while also playing a ferocious brand of hockey. Not only did Stevens break the Capitals' all-time defenseman penalty minute record with over 1,600, he also posted a +90 plus-minus, never once recording a minus season as a top pairing guy. Unfortunately, Washington was never able to put the offensive pieces around Stevens capable of taking the team to another level. After getting knocked out of the playoffs consistently to a 1980s Islanders dynasty, Stevens eventually outgrew Washington. In 1990, the St. Louis Blues offered a 24-year-old Scott Stevens an offer sheet for 4 seasons worth over $5 million per year. The Capitals had the option to match the offer sheet, but declined, as the contract value was unprecedented at the time. Instead, they took draft pick compensation, which ended up amounting to a total of 5 first-round picks. But the NHL was pissed. The deal made Stevens the highest-paid defender in the league and altered the asking price of other players in their contract demands. Players like Chris Chelios and Ray Bourque were both considered better than Stevens and were due to break the bank in their next contract negotiation. A lot of people speculate that this Stevens contract was the first domino in a string of deals that led to the 1994-95 NHL lockout. Stevens fit nicely in St. Louis. He was immediately named captain at his arrival and became the team's top defender, making his 3rd All-Star appearance. But Stevens, surprisingly, only lasted 1 year in St. Louis, and it wasn't by choice. During the 1991 offseason, the St. Louis Blues were hell-bent on buying their way to a Stanley Cup. They offer-sheeted Brendan Shanahan of the Devils to a 3-year contract. But the Blues no longer had draft picks to send back to the Devils, so they had to negotiate a compensation that both sides deemed fair value. Nowadays, this would never happen. But rules were looser back then, and when the teams couldn't agree on a fair package, the deal went to court and was decided by an arbitrator. The arbitrator awarded Stevens to the Devils, a deal that forever changed the landscape of the NHL. When the court hearing was done, Scott Stevens initially refused to report to New Jersey. However, anyone who knows Lou Lamoriello knows that would never work in his favor.
Let him sue. He's going to get his butt kicked big time. He signed a standard player's contract that'll tell him what he wants or doesn't want to do. That's why these guys get the big bucks. That's one of the lousy risks of the job.
Whether he wanted to be there or not remains aside from the point. As soon as Stevens joined the Devils, the franchise reached new heights. Stevens wasn't the only factor. New Jersey also drafted Martin Brodeur and Scott Niedermayer in the 1st round in back-to-back seasons to begin the 90s. Between the 3 of them, the Devils began to form an identity as the hardest team to score against in the league. In 1992, Scott Stevens was named captain of the team. Then, during the 1993-94 season, Stevens proved he was one of the best players in the entire league. Stevens scored a team-leading and career-high 78 points, along with a league-leading plus 53 plus-minus rating. His play catapulted the Devils into contenders. During Stevens' heroic 1994 season, the Devils went all the way to the conference finals, and even had a 3-2 stranglehold in the series against the Rangers. But the Rangers fought back after Mark Messier guaranteed a Game 6 win, and the series climaxed in a historically epic Game 7. Down 1-0 with 8 seconds left, the Devils tied the game to force overtime.
Score! They have tied it! The Devils have tied it!
The game ended up going to double overtime, the third double overtime of the series, but that was as far as the Devils would go that year. After the season, the Blues sent Scott Stevens another offer sheet. Not only did Lamoriello match the offer, he also sued the Blues for tampering. Clearly, the Blues didn't get the memo to stop messing with the Devils.
Don't mess with the devil, buddy. We're number one. We beat anybody. We're the Devils.
Stevens was officially in New Jersey to stay and had his eyes on one goal only, winning a Stanley Cup. Following the Devils' conference finals loss, Lamoriello had a discussion with Scott Stevens. The Devils wanted to deploy a defensive scheme also remembered as the trap, in a way that wouldn't allow Stevens to rush the puck up offensively like he had in the past. It was a big ask for a defenseman that was one of the best offensive producers in the league. However, Stevens obliged as the ultimate team player.
I wanted to show that I could play defense and defend and wasn't a liability. The NHL is different. You have to defend. You have to be responsible in your own zone.
Jacques Lemaire stepped in as the Devils head coach. By mid-season, the Devils were the hardest team in the league to play against. It was a sizable shift away from a previous era where offensive talents like Jaromir Jagr defined greatness. The Devils were winning games without any of the top scorers in the league during the lockout-shortened season. This was largely thanks to Stevens, as the last defensive stopper in the trap. Eventually, the Devils met with the offensively gifted Detroit Red Wings in the finals. The Wings were heavily favored, but proved to be no match for New Jersey.
Our captain, Scott Stevens, he's been, I would say, our best player in this series.
The series turning point very well could have been Stevens' open ice throttle of Kozlov.
Fedorov, headmanning the puck. Oh, Stevens came out of nowhere.
The series wasn't even close. The Devils' 4-game sweep of the Wings goes down in history as one of the most lopsided finals performances ever. Surprisingly, the Devils failed to make the playoffs the following season, the first and only time of Stevens' career.
The Devils have had 3 straight early exits from the playoffs.
Then, in 2000, was the pinnacle of Scott Stevens' career. In the conference finals, the Flyers took a commanding 3-1 series lead against the Devils. But, with their backs against the wall, they once again turned to their leader. The Flyers made a questionable decision to bring Eric Lindros back from a concussion in Game 6, almost disrespecting Stevens' presence in the middle of the ice, a decision they would wholeheartedly regret.
Lindros makes the move, and Lindros is hammered down to the ice by Scott Stevens.
Stevens took the gas out of the Flyers and wound up in the Stanley Cup Finals for the second time in his career. This time, he would face off against the defending champs, the Dallas Stars, a team built similarly to the Devils, captained by Darian Hatcher, one of the toughest defenders in the league, and tended by Ed Belfour. But when it was all said and done, they were no match for the Devils.
Arden, he scores! Jason Arden has scored! And the Devils have won the cup! And for the second time in 6 years, the New Jersey Devils are the Stanley Cup champions!
Stevens and the Devils continued their decade of dominance. In 2001, they lost to the Colorado Avalanche in the finals, but made it once again in 2003, before facing off against the Cinderella Mighty Ducks of Anaheim. To the surprise of no one, Stevens once again impacted the series with a bone-crushing hit on a superstar.
Make things happen in a hurry. By
the time Stevens was finished with hockey, the league had completely changed. For instance, hitting rules have been changed drastically to rid the league of the type of devastating headshots that Stevens was infamous for. When he played, they were entirely within the rules. Nowadays, they are suspension worthy. But let's give credit where credit is due. So here is a list of every defenseman in history to record at least 600 points and 1,500 penalty minutes in their career. A short list that consists of all-time greats. It's really hard to quantify the true impact that Stevens had on the ice, how the fear that he instilled in his opponents truly impacted games. But no one denies the impact of the two-way defenseman that led their team as physical presences and on the offensive side of the puck. Despite sacrificing offensive numbers, Stevens is possibly the most underrated superstar in modern NHL history. His style of play might have been painful to watch for fans craving offense, but there is no doubt it was effective. But we want to know what you guys think. Where does Scott Stevens rank amongst all-time NHL players? And what is his ultimate legacy? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and don't forget to subscribe to Think Hockey to keep up with our NHL content. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.